everyone, and welcome back to The Apex, a weekly conversation with the titans and tastemakers of the automotive world. Our guest this week is Matt Pryor, who holds the enviable title of Editor-at-Large at Autocar magazine. Autocar itself has been going since 1895 and is one of the world's oldest car magazines with a rich history of publishing exacting car tests written by the finest automotive journalists. Having been in the industry for over 20 years, it's safe to say that Matt is one of the leading authorities on anything and everything to do with the consumer automobile in all of its guises, and we're thrilled to have him on the show. Matt, welcome to the Apex.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
So, to begin with, could you tell us a bit about your early life in cars, and then how you ended up at Autocar and what then made you decide to climb up all the way to become editor-at-large?
Yeah, thanks. I was slightly alarmed when you said I've been in the business for more than 20 years. It doesn't. I still think I'm quite a young man, but clearly not. I don't know. I think, like a lot of people, it was family, I suppose. My dad was a mechanic when he was younger, and then he ended up working for the Ministry of Defence, running training courses for soldiers of how to fix Land Rovers and tanks and stalwarts and armoured vehicles and all that sort of thing. They used to have take your son to work day during the summer, so you'd go and look round a camp with tanks and Land Rovers and I remember they used to run one of the oil companies used to run a builder car competition for students to make cars that they would bring along. And I remember being fascinated by that sort of stuff. And then a bit later, I started messing around with Tamiya radio controlled cars and then reading Performance Car magazine. I quite liked magazines when I was younger. I used to read a lot of mags. And in the end, decided I wanted to work in cars. So I did an automotive engineering degree, which I thought was going to be rather more design-based than it was. It was a lot of maths and a lot of physics. And I realised at some point that I was better at writing. Anyway, I was going to go and work in a plastics company, saw an advert on the university notice board saying, I run a car magazine and I want a picture researcher for 6 weeks. It was a local motoring journalist who did that. And I went for it and got it. And a couple of weeks into it, he said, do you want a full-time job? And that was that. So I stayed with him for 3 years. That was a little company called Motoring Research. And then I moved, I met a guy called Richard Bremner, a very well-known journalist on the Audi A2 launch in 2000. And he said, I've set up a new website called 4Car, which is Channel 4's motoring website. Do you want a job? And I said, yes. And then he moved to Autocar in 2004 or something. And I followed him about a year or so later. And how I became editor-at-large is basically persistence, really. So when I started, Autocar had a lot of retained freelancers and it had a lot of senior staffers. And its turnover on the road test desk, which is where I moved to, was pretty big, actually. And people would come in, do it for a couple of years and then clear off. And I just thought, well, if I just stay here, then eventually, surely, something will happen. And 16 years later, they've given me various different job titles, but I've kind of do the same thing as I did 16 years ago, which is drive some cars and write about them and talk about them. There's more talking about them these days than there used to be because we've had various different video presenters, of which I'm sort of now the lead. Our lead video presenter, and it's great. I love it. Like, as you said, it's been going since 1895, and it's if you care about cars and you love them and you thrive on the deadlines and the writing side of it too. I'm still not sure there's a better staff job in the business really than what I do.
No, absolutely. So just talking about the car media space, you've been in it for a long time. And as we all know, in the car world, that's undergoing constant change. And I think it feels like we're now kind of entering the post-influencer phase. I think is not as novel as it used to be. And I think everyone would want to pick your brains on what's your take on the scene, the state of car media. Do you think there's still a role for the authoritative auto test, or as some would have you believe, is everything about now lifestyle, clicks?
I think really the audience is so much bigger than it was because 25 years ago, people had to go out and buy something in print, and that was the end of it. So the level of entry was high. You had to have the ability to produce a print magazine and get it distributed. That level of entry is much easier these days. So more people are publishers, and people have built an audience because they've got something worthwhile saying. So, and the nice thing is that it's easier to find automotive content than it was as well. You know, you don't have to go to the news agency all the time. You just open your laptop and it's there. And whether you get that from a YouTuber, whether you get that from from an established magazine, there's an audience for everybody. I would imagine more people are consuming Autocar's content than ever they have in the past 126 years. The difference is fewer are paying for it on the newsstand, if you like. I think there's space for everybody, and I think we all do different things. And there is still unequivocally a place for the independent, impartial, authoritative review. Because people are prepared to. We know people are prepared to pay for it, and we know people go out of their way to find it. And also, I mean, Haymarket, which publishes Autocar, also publishes What Car, which is kind of the UK's sort of definitive buyer's guide, if you like. And its popularity is bigger than ever. And it's we're talking to people in a lifestyle space, but also talking to people who are in market for buying cars, and who are just interested in the industry in general. So yeah, I think there's a role for everybody. I know that some people think there's a sort of conflict between influencer / traditional media, but the numbers suggest that there's a place for everybody.
That's interesting. Yeah, it definitely feels like it's a bit different to maybe some years ago when the emergence of these new channels, or YouTubes or Instagrams or whatever it was seen as a bit more of a threat. But I mean, as you say, if I'm looking for something, I'll look at Autocar, look at a YouTuber, I'll find some pictures. I think people consume the media a lot more differently. It's not more varied.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Yeah, I certainly think you're right. Is that when it first started appearing, traditional, if you want to call us, traditional old school hacks like the ones on my side of the business would look around going, who are these people? What are they doing? What does that mean? How does that threaten us? And that's a pretty natural thing for anybody else entering this similar sort of space.
Yeah.
But I think by and large there's room for everybody. I think if I did have a concern, and it's a justified one, it's that the editorial independence and integrity of journalism is key. And sometimes you see content and you think, hang on a minute, that's not necessarily totally straightforward because there's money involved in this. Funnily, a mate of mine texted me yesterday and he said, when are you testing this new Lotus Emira? And I said, well, it's going on sale next spring, so we'll probably get in it, I don't know, around about the turn of the year, something like that maybe. He said, I see Jensen Button's done a review already. I said, yeah, but that's not a car review because Jensen Button's working with Lotus.
Yeah.
So that's not true. So there is that sort of, I do still have concerns about that, is that, people should be aware of what they are seeing. But by and large, I think, there's absolutely still a place for us. Possibly now, because of that proliferation of content, now more than ever, there is a need for an independent, impartial voice.
And looking at it from the other angle, and obviously drawing on your position, what is the relationship actually like between manufacturers and something like Autocar magazine? Maybe kind of drawing on what we've just been talking about, do they see YouTube and Instagram as maybe an easier ride, or do you have to kind of manage the relationship a bit if they send you a car and you think, well, it's not really up to scratch?
Yeah, I mean, if it isn't, we try to let them know in advance of it going on sale, because what sometimes happens is that somebody in the communications team will say, we've lent you this car, that's fine, and then a review will come out and somebody in engineering management or senior management will see it and suddenly go, crikey, how did that? So we tend to let them know in advance if a review is particularly bad. The relationship largely depends on how good we think their cars are. I think, if somebody gives us a car and we think it's great, that's quite easy. But also whether we're telling people something they don't want the readers to know about upcoming product, or if you're reporting on financial difficulties, then the relationship gets tricky. The relationship is usually fine and mostly cordial, and people in communications realize that that they are helping us to put out independent reviews, which helps buyers make decisions. But it's not always. It's with some manufacturers, it's rockier than others, and it goes through little phases as well. As to whether they think influencers / YouTube / Instagram / whatever is an easier ride, I think there is something of that, and also manufacturers are producing more content of their own than they were 15, 20 years ago. So they will have their own output on social channels and so on and so forth. So, and yes, I'm sure some people are easier than some. And there's the difficulty. If somebody says, we didn't invite you to drive, we didn't think you'd want to drive that car. It's
like, what do you mean? What
we want to drive everything,
exactly,
because a manufacturer might say, actually, you know what, we've given that car to somebody else first, and that sometimes happens. There's a limited number of cars, and a lot of outlets who will want to drive them, and we make the case that, look, we're an important established title with a big audience who would like to know what we think, and sometimes you think possibly somebody else has been given a car first because they might think of it more kindly than us. And I suppose which is, you can't argue with that.
Do you find that you have a different response from different constituencies? For example, C-suite responses to their latest flagship supercar versus the guys in engineering who, maybe it's not quite the car they would have liked to make, but it's the car that the market seems to demand?
Yeah, sometimes that's quite often happens. When that situation does happen, it tends to be after we've driven it, we've given it a certain review, and then some cheeses will turn around and say, we don't think that's right. You should spend a day with our engineers, and then you go and spend a day with the engineers, and we're never telling the engineers anything they don't know already. And you sort of spend time with them. They go, we have to do this because we've done this. We have to do this. We've done that. It does happen. It does happen a bit less than you'd think. I think most of the time when we report something, the manufacturer is usually aware of that's the case. Yeah. They don't. I mean, they sometimes don't like it, but they usually know.
And so let's talk a bit about cars. You've driven almost everything on the modern market. So from all of your experience, what do you now look for in a performance car? And have there kind of been any standouts for you in recent years that you might, benchmark things against in your mind?
Yeah, standouts for me, performance car wise. I think my favorite car of the past decade is still the Toyota GT86 / Subaru BRZ, and that does what I want a performance car to do. Is it's quick enough. I don't think a performance car has to be incredibly fast. I mean, power has its advantages, and you don't have to use it all, so that's fine. But it's light. It's 12. I think we weighed one at 1,230 kilos or something, fully fueled. It's a manual. It's got a low center of gravity. It's got its weights are quite well centered within the wheelbase. It's very agile, and it tells you a lot of what it's doing, which I like a lot. It's a very involving and engaging driver's car, and it tells you what it's up to. And it's very controllable when it starts to move around on a track. And I like a performance car that does that. That's what I look for, is one that tells me a lot of what is going on while filtering the messages. So it's not giving you terrible. It's not giving you loads of torque steer necessarily. It's not kicked back through the steering or anything like that. But it's giving you the messages that you do want. And the steering is the most important thing on a performance car for me, because it's the one thing you hold all the time when you're driving, and it is your primary source of information. So that's what I look for more than anything. And there are really good cars, and there are not so good cars on that front. I mean, the best steering cars in the world are maybe Lotus Elise of late. I mean, still around. McLarens steer very well, and Lotus, the Lotus power assist, the hydraulically assisted rack on the Evora is great as well. So that's. But I enjoy much faster cars, but I don't need much faster cars than that.
And do you find that manufacturers, when they're, over the cars that you see coming in and out, are they still trying to appeal to that kind of, hydraulic steering, no driver aids kind of driver? Are they trying to extend their hand to them, or are things slowly shifting away?
Yeah, I mean, some are, and some aren't. This new Lotus retains hydraulic assistance. McLaren's retain hydraulic assistance. I mean, you can get great steering with electrically assisted steering in GT Porsches. They have great electrically assisted racks and things like that. But some do, but not all do, and that's fine. It's not what the I don't necessarily represent what the wider market wants and dictates, and that's what they go for. And I think it would be a brave manufacturer, while I turn around and say, look, I'd love it if this car got lighter and it actually didn't have to be as powerful, because it could have smaller brakes and be lighter still. But it would be a bold manufacturer who turns around and says, our replacement for this car that had 500 horsepower before is now only going to have 400.
Yeah.
And I don't see a marketing department turning around and going, oh yes, that would work.
It's less powerful, but it's better.
It'd just be a disaster. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, trust us, it's better. And then somebody turns around and goes, yeah, but it's now got the same amount of power as a Volkswagen Golf R. The Golf R is a good case in point. When you say to people, you should definitely buy a Toyota GT86, they turn around and go, yeah, but it's got 100 horsepower less than a Volkswagen Golf R. Why would I do that? And you sort of go, well, it's just nicer to drive. Yeah, exactly. It's got the tyres of a Prius. You go, yeah, that's a good thing. But some do. But I think the cars that, and it's not uncommon. I mean, car magazines were banging on about the original Honda and SX 30 years ago, and the Alpine A610. And I think they sold about 6 A610s and 30 NSXs a year, something like that. And now we're banging on about the Alpine A110 and the GT86, and people are buying Golfs and Caymans and stuff in bigger numbers. It's purist cars don't necessarily sell in big numbers, and I think as a writer, you've just got to appreciate that your audience is you've got to assess a car on its fitness for purpose, and not bang on about all the time. I just wish it was lighter and less powerful, because some cars are just going to be heavy and powerful, and that's the way consumers want it.
Yeah, and I guess another thing that's obviously happening now is this shift to EV powertrains, and I just wanted to ask, do you think it's going to be more difficult or easier in the future to be a car enthusiast? Because I get the impression that obviously with the new technology, the fact that it might weigh a bit more, it demands different kinds of designs. We're kind of hoping that we'll get a kind of GT86, but it seems to be, you've got hypercars, and then you've got, city functional EVs, and then in the middle, the sort of question is, where will the enthusiast car sit?
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by this, and I was writing about it this morning because I've just been going through the new EC legislation on who's exempt from the upcoming regulations and who isn't. And if you were somebody like what is the difference between a Ferrari and a Lamborghini and an Aston Martin? So much of that today is dictated by the engine, and those manufacturers, if they sell more than 1,000 cars in the EU, they are subject to the same zero emissions future as everybody else. So an engine, an internal combustion, isn't central to the enjoyment of a car by any means. But if you make, one electric motor behaves rather like any other one. So how you differentiate the character in future between some of those cars, I think is going to be difficult, but will be interesting. And the engineers I talk to do say they're quite excited in some ways about an electric future, because you can put power to whichever wheel you want whenever you want it. So you can do some pretty cool things and some pretty wacky things. But it will be, like you say, I think this that sort of stuff, that the hot hatchback and the fast saloon car and things like that. When all cars are fast and they all have a motor that behaves in the same way, how do you engineer back in a bit of that character that may be lost when you take away the engine?
Yeah.
If there's another generation of batteries that is lighter, I'm sure that'll help, because then an EV won't be heavier than an equivalent internally combusted car. But it is an interesting place. Yeah, I'm not sure it will be harder to be a car enthusiast, but you may have to look slightly further away, and we will all have to think a bit differently. But I'm sort of heartened that, look, by and large, cars get better and things get better. Things we own get better, and although the nature of enjoyment of those things changes, by and large, things are on the up as a rule. And there are big companies whose future depends on making you want a new car.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in a way that there's not about toasters or washing machines or whatever. You just run one until it breaks. You don't want another one. Yet the third or fourth biggest industry on the planet is governed by the fact that consumers want another one. So it's got to find a way of making cars attractive, regardless of what they're powered by. So for sort of as I get older and wrinklier, and I want to spend more time changing gears and getting oily hands and stuff like that, yeah, that market will go. But
Yeah.
they've got to find a way somehow. Otherwise, the car becomes as white good, where you buy it and you run it until you don't want to, until it's broke. But if that happens, well, I don't know. That's not necessarily bad for the planet, you know. It's bad for the enthusiast, but we'd still be able to find our niches and our cars because we'd find a way, because there's a huge back catalogue, and there are sports car companies who will want us to buy a car, and then in the normal mainstream, if somebody's going, well, I'm just going to buy a car and I'm going to pay a certain monthly fee, I don't, and when that fee is up, maybe I'll get another one, but perhaps when they're all identically reliable and identically equipped, and what's there to differentiate, but why you'd want one? We just keep it until it breaks and you get another one. Well, I mean, that's, car sales overall might reduce a bit. Would that be terrible? A bit bad for the industry, and I would feel bad for my many friends and colleagues who do it. But if overall car volumes went down, that would not necessarily be awful.
Yeah, fewer but better. Yeah. It's a really interesting perspective, actually, and it is interesting to see how manufacturers are going to take these new technologies. I mean, it's not just EVs, it's hydrogen engines, whatever's coming down the pipe. It's going to be interesting to see how they use those to appeal to various sectors of the market. But one thing you did mention there was getting oily hands and tinkering with your cars. I think one issue that I've certainly seen come up, in various discussions on Twitter or what have you, is this idea of, well, two things really. It's planned obsolescence and also the right to repair. And you get the impression sometimes looking at new cars, whether it's the fact that, a particular brand of car might have an issue where, if the screen stopped working, you literally can't tell how fast you're going and the car is basically, immobile. Or the engine bay is covered with a massive piece of plastic and you're not getting in there without the, tools and a laptop and so on. What do you think about that? Do you think the right to repair should be something that manufacturers should, accept, and what is your perspective on things like planned obsolescence?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I do like the idea that you should have a right to repair. The thing with a car is that there's a safety critical thing if you get it wrong, and also with an EV, you can be talking about some pretty big voltages, which limits it. But yes, I take the point. And cars are more complicated because they have to be, with the increase in active safety systems, but also so they've got a lot more software, but also because of legislation. Whereas 20, 25 years ago, not even that, maybe 10, 15 years ago, a Super Mini would have a naturally aspirated 1.4 litre engine. Well, now, to get through, at some point it had a catalytic converter added. Now it's also got a gasoline particulate filter added, and it's also got to have a turbocharger, and it's probably also got to have a mild hybrid system. And actually that works best when you put it through some kind of twin clutch gearbox as well. So even the most simple cars are becoming much, much more complex than they were, which does take away that ability to repair. But you're right, going forward, one of the great advantages of EVs is that they have many fewer moving parts, much more reliable, require much less servicing, and that way, how does the industry support it? I did have one exec from a car company over dinner once describe EVs as a nightmare for dealers, because what do you do when they don't need much looking after and they don't need all that maintenance? And I think I'd want to be careful that the industry doesn't engineer in too much planned obsolescence for that reason, to try and keep things ticking over, because it would be nicer if they were as functional and as reliable as your toaster, honestly. And it just, you got it on day one and it carried on working like that until such time as 10 years time you decide you don't want it anymore. But that doesn't help the industry. So I'm a bit concerned about obsolescence, too much obsolescence built in.
And speaking of obsolescence, one trend we're definitely seeing, I think we see a press release about this every 4 or 5 days, is resto mods. Electrifying old cars, basically bringing old models or quasi kind of old models or stuff that's just designed, or what's the word, homage,
Oh, good word, yeah.
bringing those onto the market, or people just making themselves. Do you see car enthusiasts flocking to electrify their classics and modern classics and things like that, or do you see that, is this a kind of cottage industry that frankly needs a bit of help at the moment?
I think it's a smallish industry, and I suspect it will remain a smallish one. Mm-hmm. I don't mind if people do it. If you want to electrify a classic, I think that's fine. And some suit it better than others. I mean, an engine is the appeal of some, the core appeal of some old cars.
It's all they've got.
But I get it. Yeah, exactly. It's all you've got. Exactly. Why would you put up the rest of it if you were taking the engine out of it? I did see some place that was electrifying 3 Ferrari Testarossas, and you think, why would you put up the rest of it by taking the flat 12? And sure, the flat 12 is the only big bit. And also the amount that Haggerty, the insurer, reckons that classic cars are driven on average 1,200 miles a year, which puts out 500 kilos of CO2. So they're not a huge burden on the environment. Owning a big dog is about 5 times, has about 5 times as much CO2 burden as driving a classic car for 1,000 miles. Yeah. So they're not a big CO2 burden, and also the CO2 burden of having them built has gone. It's long gone. But now you're effectively replacing one of the most CO2 centric bits. You're putting out a lot of energy to replace an engine with an electric motor and battery pack. And also the battery pack that you're getting today, and this may change in the next 10, 15 years, but the battery pack that you'll buy and fit today will wear out more quickly than the motor that's in the engine that's in the car, if you like. So if you're going from a sustainability viewpoint, putting an electric setup in a classic car is not helping. And
then suspension,
particularly
tires,
unless you start driving it.
Weight.
You've got to do everything else. Yeah, you've then got to do everything else because you're adding whatever it might be, 500-600 kilos of battery in it somewhere that it wasn't meant to have. So it's I don't mind people doing it. I'm very happy if they enjoy their cars, and if somebody's enjoying a car, I'm happy because it means they're not enjoying something that isn't a car, and a car is my hobby and it's my thing that I like, and I like everybody who likes cars. So if they're enjoying it, that's great. But it's not you don't do it because it's sustainable. If you wanted to do something sustainable, you wouldn't drive a new car or an old car, frankly. But so I think it'll be small, but I do see the old car. I do see the resto mod, be it an internally combusted resto mod or an EV one, or just using classic cars more. I do see that as an increasingly popular way to enjoy cars, I think.
I think I'd probably agree with you on that one. So we're coming up on time. So I've got some quick fire questions that I'd like to ask you. Okay. So the first one, and I've worded it very carefully, what is your perfect 3-car garage today? Because every time we ask this, people are like, I can't possibly tell you, oh God, can I give you a top 5, top 10? It's like, no, today.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, today. Yeah, exactly, today. And I didn't write it down specifically because I knew it was coming today, and it changes several times a day. So I know a bloke who has his top 10 dream garage written down on his phone, down to the colour. That's a full-time job. How do you ever get anything else?
How do you get anything done?
How do you ever get anything else done other than that? Yeah, nothing at all. So today, it's a nice day. I think an aerial Nomad, which I just loved a bit. So I think they're terrific. I love driving on the road.
Off-road
I like driving on track. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Aerial's mantra is you would drive down the road, and in an Atom you would turn left onto a racetrack, and in a Nomad you would turn right onto a rough track somewhere. And they're brilliant. I love them on the road. I love them on track. I think I love them on a racetrack. Actually, I think they're great.
Awesome.
I think I'd have a Porsche 917 because it's just a dreamy race car. And why would you not? If you can have any 3 cars, why would you not? I don't know when I'd use it, but what the heck? Just look at it the rest of the time. And the third one is the difficulty, because it should be maybe the practical car, but I'm today maybe it's not the practical. I think a Ferrari 250 short wheelbase.
Very nice.
Because that's
how could you not?
It's practical enough, isn't it? Frankly, I think so. I think Nick Mason had a 250 GTO and said he used to take his kids to school in it. So the short wheelbase can't be any less practical than that, can it? So that's 3 today. I'm pretty okay. It would change by 8 o'clock tonight, but yeah,
it's pretty solid selection. Second question is, what is the greatest myth in the car enthusiast community that you come across? And I'm thinking, obviously you get to drive a lot. a lot of us spend time on things like piston heads, and there are all sorts of ideas about what should and should not, be given attention, and what doesn't make a good car, and so on. I just wanted to kind of pick your brains. What's the greatest myth that you kind of hear, and you're like, well, I'm not sure that's actually true?
I think, and I've read it a lot, is that you can't call yourself a car enthusiast unless you've owned an Alfa Romeo, and that is just nonsense.
Yeah.
It's just nonsense. If you're under 40, certainly, and probably 50.
Yeah.
I'm in my mid-40s, and the amount of times that Alfa Romeo has offered a really competitive. Not everybody wants to own a classic car. That's the one thing to get out. So yeah, fine. Alfa have got some great old cars. You might not want to own a classic. You might not have space.
Yep.
You might not have time. You might not have the energy. You might just want to go out and buy a really good car for enthusiasts that you would enjoy.
Yeah.
And Alfa has had some okay cars in the past, sort of, in my adult lifetime. The 156 was a great looking car and quite good fun. But it's taken basically until the Giulia Quadrifoglio now, which by the way is 60 odd grand or whatever it is.
Yeah,
there's a whole generation of people for whom there has been no compelling reason to have an Alfa Romeo when they have an option of other stuff around.
Yeah,
and that's my thing. I haven't owned one. There are ones I'd like to own, and there's ones I like a great deal. But to think that you can't call yourself an enthusiast unless you've had one of these cars that honestly hasn't not been the best car in its class. They have not made the best car in its class for 25 years until the Giulia. So what do you do? Why would you insist somebody has to own a car? Why would you insist somebody has to have a Mito or a Giulietta to prove that they are a car enthusiast? No, nonsense, absolute nonsense.
Well, we await the pylon. We await the pylon in the comments.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, last question is: what is the most underrated car you've ever driven?
I think I've got a couple of options. The GC86 is one of those cars that everybody says is underrated, so probably doesn't count. I think there was the Ford Fiesta Zetec S of about 2008, 2009 vintage, which was quite well received, and people liked it a lot. And we ran one on Autocar for a while, and I remember going on a sort of cheap performance car, cheap driver's car tests that we did. I think we did it up in Northumberland or something like that somewhere. And that car, it only had a 5-speed gearbox rather than 6 speeds, and that, from memory, is the only thing that I didn't like about it. It just wanted to turn down the engine a little bit on the motorway with the 6th gear, just to make it a little bit easier to cruise. But I thought the steering and the ride and the handling of that car was fabulous. I thought it was really good. I suppose now that it's 10 to 15 years old, you'd get in one and the spot welds would start to creak a bit and the bushes would be shot and they wouldn't feel anything like as good as it was when it was new. But yeah, that sort of vintage Zetec S in 3-door I thought it was terrific as a British road going car, because our roads are terrible. It was such good fun. Without being really harsh, with everything else, just steered brilliantly. I thought it was great. And it's one of those. It's that sort of car when people say, "What's the best car in the world?" And I go, "Oh, well, funny enough, it's the 2008." And they want to hear Ferrari F40. They don't want to hear 2008 Ford Fiesta Zetec S. Yeah. But I thought it was brilliant for the money, for everything else. I thought it was bang on, absolutely superb.
That's fantastic. Well, that's a really positive note to end on. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. But Matt, thanks very much for your time today and for such a great chat.
No, my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The Apex is powered by Custodian, a new platform for car enthusiasts designed to help you manage your car from anywhere. Using the latest technology, it takes the pain out of ownership and lets you just enjoy the drive, because Custodian will take care of the rest. So if you believe life starts after 6,000 RPM, you need to be on Custodian. Join us now at www.custodian.club to sign up for early access and get ready to enjoy your car like never before.